All right, we are back. I'm going to wait for folks to join back in. Hello, hello, hello. So, for those that are just tuning in that weren't on the last live, we're exploring the topic of Jung and psychedelics. So, Carl Jung, today is his birthday. So, happy birthday, Carl Jung. And we are joined with Johanna Hilla. And we're just waiting for her to chime in here. And for those that were on the last live just a few seconds ago, the last one did get uploaded to be up if you want to go back and check things out. How's everybody doing while we wait for Johanna here?
Hi there.
You're back. Awesome. Hello.
Sorry.
No
I
worries.
my face mask construction just kicked me out of Instagram when I took it off.
No worries. No worries.
There we go.
Yeah, so I found out that I haven't done a live in a bit, but Instagram, I can just upload directly to Instagram TV, which is pretty cool. So this got saved, thankfully. All right. Okay, yeah, you are back too. You're lagging a little bit. So let's see. There was I think we were talking about images, and there was another question about dreams, and so this might be a fun question to dig into. So, how does Jung talk about dream states, and how might they relate to psychedelic states?
Yeah. Well, we touched this. I think we touched this in Q&A in one of the classes. Um, but yeah, I mean, this is also totally up for speculation. Um, for Jung, obviously, the dreams were an expression of some kind of unconscious process ongoing. And he also emphasizes that it's not really, well, you can interpret a single dream and that can be helpful, but in order to actually start working with dreams, it's useful to have dream material from a sequence of dreams, and then you can actually start to get a little bit of an idea or like a theme in it. And similarly, also, upon waking, you should not try to immediately to interpret your dream, rather just to try and recall as much of the context as possible and write it down, and then do the interpretation a little bit later. And that's, how you can then start to see like, okay, well, here's this, these kinds of elements, and, this is like, here I see a lot of water, or like, maybe I'm like going into this house and feeling really scared, and what could all of these things mean? So for Jung, the dream interpretation was this quite holistic, symbolic endeavor, and the basically nothing in the dreams is to be really seen as they are, because everything can be an expression, a symbolic expression of something else. So this is obviously quite different from the way in which psychedelics enact, initially at least. And obviously this is a really, really big question, and kind of one of the very, very central ones also for this course, because Jung's, primary legacy is his manner of dream interpretation, and that is still continues to fascinate all the people who read Jung, because there's this particular phenomena when people start to read Jung, they start to have some very interesting dreams, and so that somehow have this kind of relation. So it really feels like the unconscious can, or has the capacity to act in a certain way to our conscious experience. Excuse me. So can psychedelic experience then be interpreted in this lens symbolically? Well, obviously, it depends how you're taking psychedelics, and in what kind of setting, and especially what's the dose. Because what I have discovered is that in sort of doing microdosing, I think the psychedelics can enhance this capacity for this sort of symbolic interpretation of everything. Because the thing is that as you go a little bit deeper into this sort of way of symbolic thinking, um, there's a realization that also basically everything in life can be interpreted as this kind of symbolic play. And that's how we get to this, like talking about synchronicities and these kinds of things as well. um but the experience in itself, when we're talking about psychedelics, I don't think it's maybe directly symbolic while you're having the experience, and this is why I think also like this similar method as with dream interpretation could be useful for thinking about psychedelics, so that you don't immediately try to understand everything that is going on in the experience, but rather once the experience is over, then writing and reading about it, you can maybe start to see these kind of different types of things that may come up. And in that sense, I do think that this sort of thinking about psychedelic experience in a symbolic way can be a very, very useful tool, because then maybe it can also reduce the sort of potentiality of certain sorry the or yeah, I guess potentiality can be used in this context, or the potency of the certain images, because you can see like, okay, maybe this is not like actually uh, my friend being like betraying me, but maybe this is like an actually like this feeling that I would have of this is just like a symbolic expression of something else,
Mm.
so I think that can be helpful. What do you reckon, Kyle?
Yeah, this is a big thing, and I mean, I've always been really fascinated by dreams ever since I was a young kid. I mean, I can still remember some of the dreams as a young child, and my dream world became so weird and unique to the point where like I used to have dream maps, and I still do. Like if I can find myself in a place that's familiar, I understand the narrative that's attached to these places, and I can understand where to go. And when I think about psychedelics and dreams, this I think brings up like a really interesting point about how do we work with dreams.
Hmm.
You know, for example, with lucid dreaming, people kind of want to sometimes do lucid dreaming to control the situation, right? To be able to have more authority or agency within that realm. But what is it also like to become lucid in the dream and also just pay attention to the process and really just so this idea of like participation, how do you actively participate or passively participate,
Mm.
allowing the dream to unfold, but being aware and lucid within the dream, and maybe making like kind of minimal effort to really control every certain aspect. And so I also bring that into the psychedelic experience of like, kind of how do I approach the psychedelic experience kind of as this dream state as well, going in, letting it kind of unfold, sticking with the process. And then afterwards, I mean, there's so many different ways to work with dreams. Like, are we taking the symbols literally, or can we make up our own meanings around it as well, right? From a lot of the dream stuff that I've done, I really like to kind of make my own interpretations out of the images and not really read like dream books and figure out like, oh, what does that symbol represent cross-culturally? Sometimes it's helpful, but
Hmm.
sometimes that image is really unique to what's going on now. And I've been really, me and a buddy of mine have been trying to work on this inner work group that we might host through my other platform, Setting Sun. But following some of the work of Arnold Mindell with process-oriented psychology and really trying to follow these processes. And so not necessarily trying to really make sense of it, but sticking with the process and following it in certain ways. And what comes out of that? I mean, my dreams have been really psychedelic, and I think there's a lot of interesting work that can be done there, post psychedelic experience and before psychedelic experience. And what is the content that's emerging, especially when we're talking about preparation and integration? What is the material that's emerging, and really working with it before actually going into the session? And then,
Mm.
you know, afterwards is two. But I mean, I could share a lot of strange dreams that I've had that either manifested and make me question, like, what's going on here? You know, like, what's reality? And they feel really psychedelic when you can kind of get into when those dreams kind of start emerging, where it just starts to blend into your reality. And sometimes that feels like a psychedelic trip, right? You come out of a trip and you go, what's going on? And then things start to unfold in unusual, unique ways. And you go, what is going on here in
Yeah,
reality?
they're definitely very like different. I mean, like the process and the way in which they enact are, you know, I would say that they are quite different. You know, like it's like when talking about just sort of like this huge umbrella of altered states of consciousness, obviously, you know, there are so many different kinds of experience that you have, but I do feel that dreaming, um, you know, it's something that is like, you know, has been just puzzling humans for just, you know, all, throughout our existence, and like what is meaning of the dreams and so forth. So I think like in that sense, I would even say that working with dreams is a really like good first step to start the kind of collaboration with the unconscious, if you will, instead of even psychedelics, because it's kind of if because so basically one of these Jung's basic tenets is this idea of collaboration with the unconscious, and that's something that psychedelics also present to us, kind of like a possibility for engagement and discourse with some kind of other, which seemingly is part of our imagination, if you will, or anyways, part of a different reality that we usually experience. And Jung basically believed that this um, collaboration is the easiest way to start working with it is through dreaming. And, you know, anything else that might come into play may even have potentially hazardous consequences because it may be too powerful for the person's psyche. And I think this is, you know, a good point to also say that this is the reason why Jung advised against using psychedelics, was because he believed that it's quite easy to have your everyday psyche overwhelmed, and that therefore those consequences that might come out of that may be, you know, weigh so heavily that they may not, you know, be kind of worth the experience. And that also that we shouldn't just be doing things because of wanting to have a certain type of experience, but rather, you know, with some kind of intention of either to heal or somehow bring back some kind of betterment for our community, for instance. So I got a little bit sidetracked there probably, but um, I do think that, you know, it's also like working with dreams is always a safe way, because you know, you cannot really go wrong with it. So I would definitely recommend pursuing that avenue of exploring altered states, like first and foremost, because it can be so interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And I think we're actually touching on a question that I just had up. And Emina, I think you asked this. Jungian psychologist in Italy, no traces of official Jung's writings that express itself on psychedelics, but also knowing the position of psychedelic experiences, boost access to archetypal world for which they're not already. Thus, would they risk breaking through a threshold too early towards an energy that conscious self would not be able to bear? What's your position on this? And I think this is what you're also touching on, is that psychedelics do have the potential to really kind of, you know, blow out that at times if people aren't really ready for it, right?
Yeah, my teacher in Argentina, he gave me this analogy when I went up to him as a young student and very excited about psychedelics, which I completely rejected at the time. And I mean, I still kind of question it because I don't think it is really like this. But he basically told me that, you know, taking psychedelics is like forcing a flower to open before
Mm,
its time, like tearing the petals open. And it's like instead of waiting for the gradual, you know, inner blooming that will take time and will take a lot of work, sunlight and water and patience. And I back the day I was like, this this is a terrible, terrible symbolic image for this situation. But yeah, I think about it every now and then, and I can also see how psychedelics could act in that way. Because when a person has a very, very powerful experience and no good context for integrating it, um, it sort of like can sort of stay and hang in the air in a way. It's like, okay, so how can we actually best put into work, or like how can we best bring out the benefits of this experience instead of just sort of being in awe of the experience itself. And yeah, that's why I think this sort of certain cautiousness is also uh, one of these good things that can come from Jungian psychology. And also going back to this question that came out, early on in this chat, the sort of like, why add to the confusion when there's like already people talking about depth psychology and psychedelics, and that maybe it's all just this sort of like irrational, chaotic nonsense. But like, no, it's like it works in a different way. Like we have our sort of rational, logical consciousness, um, that has brought so many benefits for humankind. But there's like this whole different type of way of engaging with reality, which I think that psychedelics also uh, promote. And that is the kind of sort of engagement with symbolic narratives and images, and sort of tuning in, soul searching or soul sailing, um, that can be brought forth through that. And like it takes time to learn this language. I think it's a lifelong process, actually. So there's no need to rush it either.
I think that's really important. Yeah, not to rush it. And we get into this often in our shadow course, the shadow side of psychedelics that I did with Dr. Ito Cohen. Like this idea, I think really kind of stemmed from Terrence, but I mean also from other folks. Really going big, right? Blowing and killing out the ego and just thinking about ego death and wanting to destroy it. And how do we take a longer approach here? And when I think about some of the work in the somatic world and thinking about trauma, like, going into the deep end too quickly isn't always, sometimes the best thing to do, right? And when we look at stuff like possibly like reactivation or HPPD, thinking about the traumas that can emerge in psychedelic experiences and how that starts to have ripple effects, or people having breaks afterwards, just being exposed to way too much. And so I think being able to, take that slower approach can be helpful sometimes. I mean, there is something to the deep dive into the void, and I definitely can say how positive that can be, but also, again, I think taking that slow approach, working with it consciously, being able to do the preparation, integration, and really like what's your agenda here with psychedelics, right? Are we trying to? I guess this is why I kind of come back to like Hillman too, this idea of soul making or soul like sculpturing, and like how
Mm-hmm.
do we really like take our life and kind of craft it over time without needing to just completely break it down. But how do we really approach it with a more conscious effort? Somebody's asking about dosage. I always come back to something Dr. David Nichols says about dosing. Psychedelics aren't very dose dependent. You could take a very small amount and get blown out. And I've also seen people take large amounts and also not have too much of an experience. So, do your own research, and I think you got to figure that out yourself.
Yeah.
Um, There's another question here about how can understanding of archetypal dynamics in the collective unconscious help psychedelic therapists in their practice? I think we've been kind of touching on that here and there with the
Yeah.
integration work and being able to make sense of experiences and work with it.
Well, I think there's one thing that could be added, which, well, like when thinking about people, I assume that most of you who have somehow ventured into this arena are somewhat familiar with, for instance, with the notion of collective unconscious, and that, there is this sort of possibility for this pool of unconscious material that can emerge into the psyche of a person, when it's stimulated in a way, or, through some kind of trance state, basically, um, or in dreams. And, you know, I think that just this idea of the collective unconscious, of even considering the possibility that we may not only have our individual personal consciousness, is so helpful. And that, for instance, when psychedelic therapists is starting to become more prevalent, and there's going to be a lot of people who are seeking for assistance, and some kind of wise words on their trips, basically. um it's like, well, at least, if people would have this idea of the collective unconscious, and of this like possibility that there's other type of material that may come up that is not even maybe directly related to that person, um
Mm,
and that, it can be kind of random, almost, in a sense, because this is what Jung was working with all throughout, because he basically had this idea, like he was very compelled by Gnostics, and he even went out and wrote like a Gnostic sermon, and he really felt like he was embodying that um, idea of a Gnostic spirit. And I think that this can just happen in, minuscule versions, in so many different ways. In Man and His Symbols, he tells an example of this small girl who starts to have these immensely symbolic dreams. And she has these dreams for about 8 months, and then very, very abruptly she gets sick and dies. But these dreams were there throughout, but her parents couldn't understand why she was all of a sudden, like, having extremely vivid dreams about like snakes and crosses, and like
mm.
snakes eating elephants, and then something else. It's just things that basically could not fit into the imagination of that small girl, and that maybe it was back in the day about things that she could have not possibly even have found out about. So I think the idea of the collective unconscious in itself is immensely helpful for thinking about psychedelics, because they, I believe, act as kind of like a filter, or that our minds become more transparent. There's more material that can pass through, and sometimes that material can be very obscure and hard to interpret. So yeah, I guess that would be my answer to that question.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, and I think just having some of these ideas, yeah, just even the collective unconscious, right? Like just even thinking about somebody that had an experience, and then coming in and talking about it, and when is it the individual experience and then the collective experience? And we've talked about this, especially when COVID really started to like take off. Something that kept coming up is like, should I do a psychedelic during this time? And just even thinking about what's going on in the collective at this point, like, and could the collective energy amplify your experience? And so even just having like that framework, I think could just be really helpful for understanding, because then it's like, oh, I had this like really big experience, and is that attached to the individual, or are you actually having this bigger experience and really feeding off of that collective energy? And yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
think
mean,
there's a lot of value here.
yeah, I mean, I think that's a great example, because it's, yeah, like, I do think that, the atmosphere which we are surrounded by, can totally appear in people's dreams, and visions, and also just like everyday mood, in like a very powerful way. And Jung experienced this himself, because he had the reason why he decided to write the Red Book and to go into this internal journey was because he, in starting from 1912, started to have this intense period of dreams and waking visions that were so compelling, and he did not know what was going on with these visions, but he had, like, there some of them were pretty terrible, filled with violent material, and uh, one time he had a vision of Europe drowning in blood,
Mm.
and basically he did not know what to do with these visions before the First World War started. And that was when he realized, like, ah, okay, this was not actually something that was going on for him only, like, didn't really concern even his life. It was like about the collective situation in Europe at that time. And yeah, I think, like, when you think about something, like when you go into something like Jungian psychology, these type of ideas that a person can also, mm, I don't know how, if this is a correct word, but to channel in a way some kind of aspect of the collective atmosphere or environment, it becomes more acceptable, a little bit more, yeah, easier to understand.
Totally, totally. Um, you probably had, interactions with the Jungian community, and this is something that I always think about. And some of my interactions have been, some of the Jungians aren't really open to psychedelics. And I wonder if you've had that experience as well, and why do you think that is?
Um, so I think this is actually the common experience, and it was very funny when I was studying at this Jungian Institute in Argentina, because some of the younger people there, they would also do ayahuasca ceremonies. Um, but they wouldn't talk about the ayahuasca ceremonies with some of the older people at the institute, because they were totally like, no, no, like, you shouldn't mess with these kinds of things, because they may, hinder your um, balance as a, individual, because Jung did not take psychedelic substances. Uh, and I think this is just largely because of Jung's way of looking at it, because he does that, it's that's the kind of how it works, when there is a group of people who read one person's works and then they take everything that they say as gospel. I mean, I also take a lot of things that Jung says as being very valuable, but I still think that you should, have the capacity to make your own judgments about certain things. And I think Jung's reluctancy towards psychedelics, um, yeah, I think I would have just loved to see him do psychedelics and then then give his opinion on it.
I
And
also wonder how his
he was,
theories would change, or like
I know,
if he would
like, he
backtrack
was
on
invited.
stuff. And
Yeah, he was invited to be part of a mescaline scheme by this guy called, I think his last name is Hubbard. I don't know what it's, I think Arnold, or Arnold Hubbard, somewhere in the 50s. And this was a this Arnold Hubbard. He had been introduced to LSD by I think Ronald Sandison, who was the guy who brought LSD from Switzerland to the United States. And he was also, luring a lot of these kind of intellectual at the time to psychedelics. And he also did psychedelics with Timothy Leary. So it's just like, Jung could have been part of that direct lineage of people who were engaging with psychedelics as well, but he didn't. And that decision, it totally reformulated the opinions of Jungians later on, because you will find that in most Jungian communities, psychedelics are not discussed. So yeah, I think that there's more, and I mean, I'm just not gonna do a spoiler alert, but those people who take the course, you will also find out
yes.
a little bit more about this. Um, yeah.
Awesome, thank you. I know we're heading at time, and I want to be respectful for your time and just say thank you for, just sharing everything that you've been sharing with us today, and taking the time to do this. There are some questions in here about psychedelics for bipolar, borderline, psychosis. For those questions, we actually have an article on our blog, psychedelicstoday.com. Go over to the blog. We have an article about borderline and bipolar disorder if you want to check that out. I'm not going to comment too much on that topic here right now. And there were some other questions about courses and getting involved in the psychedelic field. Since you talked about the psychedelic course, what are the fields where somebody can thrive with such course and degrees? The field's changing so much. So, when I first started, I really thought, um, it was the clinical counseling route. I mean, now as things are starting to really blossom, I mean, I didn't think I would be podcasting and creating this platform. I really thought I was just taking the clinical route. And at this moment, I'm not really doing too much clinical work at all. I'm mostly just pouring a lot of my time into education. So, before it was really heavily focused on clinical research. And so whether you became a psychologist, a counselor, or doing research. But things are opening up now, and we need lots of different skill sets, right? So there's lots of
Yeah,
opportunities brewing. So I
I
always
mean,
encourage people to focus on what you're most curious in, and psychedelics are an adjunct to whatever you want to be doing, right? Because I mean, we always say, yeah, we need somebody who's a lawyer who knows psychedelic law or who's open to it, or oh wow, like graphic designers that have a psychedelic background that understand how to represent things visually. Educators. There's so much opportunity here for a lot of different folks.
yeah, that's a great advice. Yeah, just basically, go with the thing that already interests you, and then, maybe psychedelics or the lessons that you've learned from psychedelics can be incorporated to that.
Yep, yep, exactly. So, Johanna, thank you. So again, if people want to learn more and dive into psychedelics and Jung, we have an early bird special going on right now over at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. And check out the course. It's called Imagination as Revelation. Early bird pricing ends on August 9th. If anybody's on our emailing list, I'm sorry I put July 9th on there. I guess my mind doesn't want to believe that's, we're heading into August. So yeah, check that out, psychedeliceducationcenter.com, Imagination as Revelation. If you do decide to go forward with the course, just want to give you a heads up, the course material isn't live yet, and it will be live in a few weeks. So we're just doing some early bird pre-sale stuff right now. So, Johanna, you want to close with anything?
Thank you so much for arranging this. I think there's some connectivity troubles now, and thank you for all the folks who wrote comments and questions. I will read them now because I didn't read most of them throughout. So yeah, it was great to chat with you, Kyle, as always, and yeah, looking forward to hearing your experiences, and if you do enroll for the course, uh, please leave comments and also roses with spikes on them if you want, because that will help us to do this better in the future. So thanks for sticking around, and yeah, have a lovely day, everyone.
Yes, thank you. And I'm just dropping the link in here really quick to psychedeliceducationcenter.com. That is it again. And thanks everybody for joining. This has been really fun. Sorry if we couldn't get to everybody's questions and comments. We were really trying to stick with some of the stuff people submitted so we'd get that going. And I just wanted to stick to more of a structured format. But thank you. I've been trying to read everything as it's been coming through, and it's really hard to try to read and answer everything also while trying to navigate all these questions and topics. So thanks everybody, much love, and hope to see
Yeah,
you in the Imagination as Revelation course. So take care everybody, and thanks again, Johanna.
yeah. Ciao. Thank you.